Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
This holiday season, when you can't be there, let 1-800-Flowers.com deliver. At 1-800-Flowers, every gift is crafted with care and designed to make spirits bright. From classic holiday bouquets and unique one-of-a-kind designs to gift bundles you can't find anywhere else, 1-800-Flowers makes it easy to stay connected, no matter the distance. Just a few clicks and your thoughtful gift is on its way. Visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST to deliver joy, beauty, and celebration this holiday season.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Gary Bain and I'm here with the inimitable Peter Hart.
You can pronounce it, that word.
I've been practicing.
Oh, right.
It was a choice between that and arseface.
Oh, yeah. I'd have gone for arseface myself. It's easier to pronounce.
Yeah.
So what are we doing today, Gary?
Well, today it's the second of our podcasts that try to tell the story of Ian Hamilton, or Sir Ian Hamilton in later life. And this one, rather imaginatively, is called The Middle Years.
Ooh.
Which is 1881 to 1902, which is not a lot of years to be the middle. How old did he live to? He was about 94, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
he died in 1949, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Amazing.
that's the middle then.
If he'd lived another 6 years, he'd have been alive
In
when
the
I was
middle.
alive. In the middle.
Yeah.
Well, this is the second of 3. We'll be doing another one on Gallipoli. Our assessment is performed at Gallipoli, and then that'll be it. Now, so listen to the first one if you want to know what the first one was about. I think that's good advice, don't you, Gary?
Yeah, but we can lead in. After his experiences in India and at Majuba Hill,
Ooh, is that in
which
India?
featured largely in the first
Yeah,
podcast,
that's in the first Boer War, in Boer War land.
in about 1856-ish, something like that.
No, Gary.
Well, if that's the middle, it would be.
No, Gary, stop being literal-minded. I've forgotten when it was. 1881, I think.
Well, Ian Hamilton should perhaps have gone to the Staff College at Camberley.
Yeah.
But what happened then?
Well, he got a better offer. As far as he was concerned, Sir Frederick Roberts, he's the commander-in-chief of the Madras presidency in India. He personally asked Hamilton, for Hamilton as his ADC, aide-de-camp. And I quite like Hamilton's response that he had enough bloody studying. He accepted, yes! Yes.
So he literally burnt his books then?
He burnt his books, although he later on got to go back to study. But this is quite interesting because it's a big career step, and there's an awful lot of whining in the future about seniority, why he doesn't get a better posting in this First World War, the Great War. But what would have happened if he'd gone to Camberley, do you think? And this is all speculation.
Well, he would perhaps have joined the circle of officers who were associated with General Sir Garnet Wolseley, who were colloquially known as the Africans,
so that would
imaginatively,
be the Wolseley ring.
Of the Wolseley ring.
Ooh.
So they would all be very close to Wolseley's ring.
Yes. Now,
instead,
Hamilton
would become identified with the Indians and of Robert's ring.
So which was a bigger ring?
I think Wolseley had a massive ring.
Right. So in essence, in the end, Hamilton, he doesn't bestride both rings, but he does. He's one of the few that does serve in Africa after because he'd served in Africa.
He does sort of claim a foot in both camps, though, doesn't he?
But there's a lot of antipathy in his heart against the Wolseley ring. It really, and if you read his writings, he's always slagging Wolseley and Redvers Buller, who is General Sir Redvers Buller, who is he's a big ringer.
He's a big part of the Wolseley ring.
Yes.
Now, on the 25th of February 1882, Hamilton's promoted to captain, and in the same month, he sets off for India.
So as an ADC to Roberts, he becomes a member of the household. An ADC is like a gopher, isn't it? You must have had one when you worked for TFL. You must have had a gopher. Wasn't he called Chris Carling?
Something like that. And once part of the household, it gets very friendly, doesn't it? And Hamilton acquires the nickname of Johnny. Quite where that comes from, I'm not sure.
Yes, and you see books called Johnny Hamilton. There's a appalling book on Hamilton called Johnny Hamilton. It really is dreadful. But yes, that becomes his life. That's the nickname for the rest of his life. So what's he doing? He's doing more than just gophering, isn't he? What else does he do?
Well, he's writing speeches, preparing dispatches, and that's all part of his official duty. But his main role was as Assistant Adjutant General of Musketry at Army Headquarters.
Now there, he's Madras Presidency, so that's not of the British forces, this is of the Indian forces, the Indian Army ones, the native army in the terminology of the time, and not our terminology particularly. So what does he do? Because this is, it doesn't sound very important, Assistant Adjutant General, but what does he start doing?
Well, he rewrote the whole of the musketry regulations for the Indian regiments and claimed to have initiated a revolution in musketry training based on his vivid experience at Majuba Hill and the Afghan wars. He worked his ideas up into a book called The Fighting of the Future.
Now, I'd like to read that, and I haven't read it. I want to make clear that the comments we're going to make are based on what people have said and what Hamilton said is in his other books. So what is the emphasis that he puts in this?
Well, clearly it's on the improved marksmanship of the individual soldier, not the massed volley. Hamilton, he detailed the training required on the rifle ranges, and we'll go through them. One was the abolition of obscure barrack square drill movements and instead concentrate on the basic skills of rifle shooting.
So the idea is to build up the individual's confidence at ranges of up to 200 yards. That's 600 feet, Gary.
Thank you. Yes, and slower and more deliberate firing at longer ranges.
With the idea of hitting things. Right? It's a novel, as opposed to just blazing off. I mean, volley flying, if you watch Napoleonic things, it's just a matter of fire low and just aim straight ahead of you at a mass of the enemy. But this is about hitting individuals. Yeah. What else?
Well, snap shooting at jumping up targets at different unpredictable ranges.
And then the last one I really like is he had his men shooting at barrels that were rolling and bounding downhill towards the fire. And again, it's to overcome the instinct to shoot wild and high. I wonder how many were injured during that.
Now, using these methods, the Indian regiments began to outclass British battalions in their shooting skills.
But I think we ought to point out this is from an extremely low base. So they don't all become expert marksmen straight away. We're talking about a very low level of shooting skills before he started. Now, is this noticed by those in authority?
Oh, in some cases, yes. The Duke of Cambridge saw the rapid and demonstrable improvement of the Indian Army and took steps to see that Hamilton's system should become the basis for musketry training throughout the British Army. But this took time. Now, there was other evidence of modern thinking in the book. Hamilton also predicted the demise of the cavalry, which he proposed should be converted to mounted infantry straight away.
Well, in that's the diametric opposite of Haig.
That's exactly what I thought.
Because Haig was against mounted infantry, which he said weren't very good at riding and weren't very good at being infantry.
Well, he said they weren't very good at anything,
and he wanted cavalry to be trained to do everything, to be the perfect soldier, capable of infantry fighting and of course using the arme blanche, which we now know only had a short life, but at the time was I think, to be honest, Haig's right and Hamilton's wrong, and certainly the British Army did away with mounted infantry, if you like.
Now, another thing he predicted was the end of the forward deployment of field artillery, where the crews were vulnerable to accurate long-range rifle fire. Fewer guns of a heavier calibre were his suggestion at this time.
Well, we've talked about this again, and he's probably right. And so they need both. They need lots and lots of both. But I think Le Cateau is the best example of what happens if you put field guns close to people who can shoot, because they were wiped out just about. The one artillery brigade was wiped out when it was put in line with the infantry. So I think that's very, very important. Well, it's not just writing military treatises, is it, though? Writing's becoming a very important part of Hamilton's life. And he was experimenting with journalism, poetry and fiction. And there's a quote from Ian Hamilton then, that you might like to read, Gary.
I'd rather write one really sweet and famous sonnet than be QMG in India or even CNC himself. QMG, Quartermaster General, CNC, Commander-in-Chief.
He's lying.
I think he is, actually.
Because what's he really doing?
Well, he's studying hard for his promotion exams at the time.
He's looking for promotion to major. Now, this isn't the same as doing staff. We mentioned he burnt his books there, but you still have to study to pass your majors exams, and that's what he's aiming for.
Now, Hamilton was due for 6 months home leave, and as a new campaign started in the Sudan, he saw the chance for more active service.
Now, this is very similar to Haig. These people have got similar trajectories.
Their paths cross a lot, don't they?
Well,
all of them.
All of them, yes, that's the best way. In the Sudan, as we heard in our thing on Haig in the Sudan, an Islamic prophet, the Mahdi, had taken control and destroyed all forces sent against him. At this, General Sir Charles Gordon had been sent to Khartoum in January 1884, and he was meant to organise an orderly withdrawal from Khartoum, but instead he sort of stayed with the people and allowed himself to be besieged by the Mahdi. That led to a huge shit hitting the fan back in England. Gladstone was totally against any sort of relief expedition, but his hand was forced by public opinion. So what happens?
General Sir Garnet Wolseley was placed in charge and conceived of a slow and deliberate advance along the Nile, in conjunction with an additional camel-borne desert column.
So and that column, that was Redvers-Buller's job. So what happens to Hamilton? He arrives at Suez, Port Suez, in October 1884, and he was lucky enough, by influence, to get a post into the 1st Gordon Highlanders. Now, this is all despite his status as an Indian officer, and this is an African campaign. And that's interesting because Hamilton has his own influence, and I think it's his reputation gained from Majuba that facilitates him an exception to the general rule being made for him. Now we now have what happens? He's put what has he done? What's his job? Well, his company they're going on the Nile part, the river boat expedition. Churchill wrote a great book on this, and he's going up the Nile in 11 small boats with his company. And you've got a quote that just it gives us a really good picture of it, doesn't it?
This is Ian Hamilton. Our feelings were as nearly as possible those of a party of Boy Scouts dressed up like Red Indians and let loose in a flotilla of canoes. Each boat of 8 rowers, a poleman and a coxswain, was and had to be a self-supporting independent unit. At the best, the company got together about once in 10 days when the negotiation of a cataract called for combined effort on the drag ropes or for portage of stores. If a boat failed to put in an appearance at the rendezvous, the captain had to unload his own boat and thus lightened, row back down the river to find the lame duck and help it along. The tale has the ring of glorious adventure, and so it was, only at the time it was incessant toil, much of it waist deep in water, bad food, broken nights, the lack of any drink but sand and water, the resultant scurvy. All these wore health and nerves to fiddle strings. Never in their whole lives had the men worked so hard. The mere thought of such a job would make a modern labour union call a strike. Yet there was no crime, no stinting of effort, no grumbling.
Bollocks.
Well, soldiers never complain, never grumble.
They observe a lot.
They observe an awful lot.
Now, 2 things about that. One is that's bollocks, that they do grumble. And the second thing is, notice that he wrote that this is from his book, Listen to the Drums or something. And of course, Boy Scouts. There were no Boy Scouts then. There weren't any Boy Scouts till Baden Powell formed them in about 1908. And it's interesting that when I chose this quote, it didn't spring out. But while I was listening to you, as usual, listening for errors and mistakes in you, I thought, Boy Scouts?
Although he would have written that much later, of course.
He did, right, that's what I mean. But they didn't at the time think this is like being in the Boy Scouts. That's in retrospect.
Now also, for Hamilton, the real work was done by the 4 British battalions and their Egyptian auxiliaries of the river column. But all the glory went to the desert column. Hamilton roundly condemned Wolseley for this fanciful idea of sending a separate column across the desert, as he felt all resources should have been concentrated along the river. Yeah,
in the end, it's all for nothing, as Khartoum actually fell and Gordon was killed on the 26th of January, 1885. Let's leave our points, but you notice Hamilton's got it in for Wolseley all the time. He's got it in for Redvers Buller as well. So what happens to the river column, Gary?
Well, General Earl, who's the commander of the river column, pushed ahead with a personal escort that included Hamilton's D Company, 1st Gordon Highlanders. On the 10th of February, they reached the village of Kirbekan and found an entrenched dervish host barring their path.
Now, this is interesting because General Earl is not a modern general. He's a real old school. He believed in old formations, close, he was just a disciplinarian, but he was old school, real old school. But he also was an aggressive general. They went straight into the attack. They advanced directly along the riverbank, used a steady fire of the infantry to pin the enemy to their positions, and then Earl led the rest of them in a sort of enveloping movement along a desert valley, got behind Kirbekan Ridge, and stormed the dervish lines from the rear. And this is a quote that I'm going to read of Hamilton that sort of gives you the picture. And he says this: "In open attack formation, our men went for them, destroyed their ground counterattack of spearmen by fire, and then stormed the heights from the rear. No one escaped. A few dozen desperate fugitives leapt into the raging Nile, but it is doubtful if any got across. In the morning, the dervish leader held us, so he thought, in the hollow of his hand. When the sun was low, he was dead. His warriors were dead. Their bodies formed an outline like a huge, sprawling snake, marking the line of the spearmen's onset, or else they lay bayoneted in their rifle pits." Wow. And again, one of the things is, this is people armed with spears against people armed with Martini Henrys or whatever they were. I think it was Martini. But it's not a fair fight, is it?
No. And sadly, Earl himself is killed even as he triumphed.
Yes, he was. I think he looked in at a hut and was shot from within. Anyway. Now, so the river column, that's then under the command of General Henry Brackenbury, and they continue to move upriver. Gordon's dead by now. We've mentioned that, but they're still seeking to break break the power of the Mahdi. So what happens?
Well, it weren't to be. Redvers and the Desert Column were obliged to fall back, and although the river column had almost reached Abu Hamid, where the river became easily passable, Brackenbury ordered the retreat. He took a seat in Hamilton's boat, with Hamilton at the helm, and as they began the return journey, Hamilton greatly criticised the manner in which Wolseley had directed the campaign and the division of his forces. He was convinced that Roberts would have been a far more dynamic commander who would never have permitted the dilettante experiment of the Desert Column.
Now, this is where it's time to make a few general points about Hamilton. Hamilton, in a sense, was an acolyte of Churchill in that he would write his own history. And throughout his life, he wrote his own history. A lot of the sources on Hamilton are who?
Hamilton.
Yeah. And whose side is Hamilton on in the Wolsey ring versus Roberts ring?
Roberts. Very strongly.
And so therefore, perhaps not everything should be taken as what Hamilton says.
Are you suggesting he may have been biased?
Yes, he was biased, and it shows throughout his career. He is part of the Indian ring. He is definitely biased against Redvers Buller, against Wolsey. And I think before you just accept what he says, you need to do some more research, as do you, Gary, and as do I.
It was at this time Hamilton was given the rank of Brevet Major.
Just explain that to me again.
It's local rank, so he's still a substantive captain and would be recognised outside of the area as such, as will be clear in a moment. So he's given the rank of Brevet Major, and he returned to resume his duties as ADC to Sir Frederick Roberts, who is now Commander-in-Chief of India.
Now, Hamilton made a big impression on a young callow lad on one of his first postings. You might recognise the name from Gallipoli. William Birdwood?
Never heard of him.
Yeah. Well, he's sailing now on his first posting to India in June 1885. And what does he think of Hamilton?
We had with us also a Captain Ian Hamilton of the Gordon Highlanders. In the eyes of us youngsters, Ian Hamilton already wore a halo of glory by virtue of his service in the Afghan War, the Boer War of 1881, and the Nile expedition.
And that's it. And this is something we keep banging home. This is a man of experience who's led a military career that is not just Gallipoli. Nor, by the way, is Birdwood's career just Gallipoli. They're all men with long careers, aren't they?
And also the fact that people are starting to admire his service, his active service. And that becomes more relevant later in his career, when even the Germans thought he was the best qualified British
and
commander.
This is 30 years before Gallipoli.
Absolutely.
Now, shortly after he arrived, Roberts is posted, detached off to operations in Burma, where the military commander, General Macpherson, had died from fever. Britain had cheerfully annexed Burma in 1886, and that was to avenge several outrages, Gary, against British citizens and business interests. And following they refused. They were said, we'll establish, the British Empire said, we'll establish a protectorate here. The Burmese refused that, and fighting broke out. Think of any, does this remind you of a peace-loving British Empire bringing peace to the world?
Yes.
No, I think it's more that of an evil empire. Well, we have to be ambivalent about the British Empire. It's good and bad in parts, and it's just not nice to certain areas. It wasn't nice to the Burmese.
Politics with Pete and Gary. Hamilton was on the staff, ostensibly as Persian interpreter.
Did he meet any Persians?
I shouldn't think so.
Burma.
6 brigades of troops were sent out to pacify the turbulent districts of mountain and jungle country. The expedition was a success, and as an aside, they also looted anything not nailed down.
Yes. All told, this is not the British Empire's finest hour, really. No, Hamilton's finest hour occurs in 1887. What do I mean by that?
Well, he gets married. He marries Jean Muir, who's the daughter of a wealthy Glasgow businessman with extensive interests in India.
And there's actually a book about Lady Hamilton written by the wife of John Lee, who wrote the book about Hamilton. So, and I recommend that. Sadly, I haven't got it, which is reprehensible in the extreme.
In July 1887, Hamilton was given the brevet rank of a lieutenant colonel. As Commander-in-Chief India, Roberts could now step up his personal war against the British Army's crude rifle training. Hamilton was made Assistant Adjutant General of Musketry for the whole army in India, and the principles he'd laid down in the fighting of the future could be more generally applied.
Now, the one thing that's happening is that they're just about to introduce magazine rifles, which we see ultimately in the Lee Enfield. And these magazine rifles, what does that mean? What does it mean if you have magazine rifle? What is more important than ever? What is it, Gary? What?
Good and accurate fire control is now more important than ever. And much was achieved, and the standards do rise.
Still not excessively so, but they're rising. Now, Roberts returns to England in 1893, and here he gives evidence of the improvements that have been achieved in India, and he finally convinces the Home authorities of the need of a major reform of the British Army's training. And Hamilton's role in this shouldn't be underestimated. But I want to make the point we're making as well. It shouldn't be overestimated. There are other people involved, and who wrote most of the things that we're quoting about how brilliant Hamilton is and how important he is in the
Hamilton.
Yeah. Now, now there is evidence now of the bad effect of these two competing rings of Indian and African officers. Why would I say that?
Well, his status as an Indian officer meant he was not promoted to substantive colonel until a sustained campaign, which got as high as the cabinet, finally confirmed Hamilton's promotion to full colonel. I mean, that's unusual, that needing to go as high as the cabinet.
Yeah, it just means that there's bias within the system. I mean, we've criticised Hamilton's bias. Well, this is utterly ridiculous bias from the African ring. I mean, it's a two-way process. Both sides are hopelessly biased. It's not healthy, is it?
No. Hamilton was then appointed military secretary to the new Commander-in-Chief India, General Sir George White, VC.
We'll hear about him again. And we heard about him with Haig. He came up in that story. Now, Hamilton plays a part in convincing White, he says he did anyway, in a policy of forward defence. What do I mean by a policy of forward defence for India? You don't understand anything about cricket, but never mind.
Well, that India was best defended against the Russians and their tribal friends beyond Kabul and Kandahar in the mountainous regions of the northwest frontier, rather than on the plains of the Punjab.
So, to keep them out, like a forward defensive at cricket, get down the wicket and keep them back as far away as possible. And then something rescues Hamilton from more desk duties. What's that? It's the siege of Chitral. I'm not sure how you pronounce
That's
that.
easy for you to say.
It is. And where is Chitral then? Exactly, Gary.
It's just 50 miles from the Russian border.
The Russian border is very long, Gary. Whereabouts?
Just left by that tree.
Right.
Now, a relief force under General Sir Robert Lowe was dispatched on the 1st of April 1895. Hamilton was appointed double-hatted as Assistant Adjutant General and Assistant Quartermaster General.
Now, what are they both?
They're both assistants.
They're both staff posts.
And assistants.
But he hasn't been to Staff College.
Well, Golden Islander, he'll never go.
Yeah, yes, what a bunch. Anyway, Hamilton's absolutely delighted, and he writes to his wife, and this is what he says. I'm saying this to you, Gary. I cannot tell you, darling, what a good thing it will be for me. Just the making of me. Not medals or that sort of thing, I don't mean, but teaching me just where I was weakest, and afterwards make me just as qualified for service on the home staff as if I'd passed the Staff College. Well, it doesn't. PSC, past Staff College, is more important. But it is vital experience, and from now on, he is considered for staff postings. He would have been better off with a proper PSC, but nevertheless, he does get the experience, and it is quite an experience. So what does he end up doing?
Well, he ends up in charge of the complex logistical arrangements for the expedition, moving tens of thousands of pack animals and men through mountain passes under threat of attack.
Now, in 1895, Hamilton's offered the post of Deputy Quartermaster General India by Sir George White. That's another really demanding staff job. And then Hamilton's appointed to serve commanding the 1st Brigade in the expedition to be led by General Sir William Lockhart to attack the Afridi and other tribes in the Tirah. This is the Tirah campaign, surprising enough. And this was for those naughty tribes had been continuously lawless. In other words, they wouldn't accept British rule and had to be punished.
Now that promised to be his first service as a general officer.
Yeah, what? Brigade commander, brigadier general, acting, but yeah, that would be good. So what happens?
Well, by the 6th of October 1897, he's at Peshawar, organising his troops for the advance on Kohat and crossing the difficult Kohat Pass to join General Penn Simmons' 1st Division.
But then disaster strikes, and you're, again, Ian Hamilton.
I was riding quietly along when my pony shied at some veiled women on donkeys, slipped up on the road and fell bang over on his side. I almost threw myself clear, but was caught by both stirrups in my big shooting boots, and he rolled over my leg, smashing it, and then got up and dragged me by the other foot, which had still stuck in. When I jumped to my feet, I felt my leg crack and bend, and then it came over me in one bitter instant that the show was at an end for me.
Now, who did he give his brigade to?
Well, it was given to Brigadier General Hart, VC.
He sounds lovely, doesn't he?
Yeah. Then to add to his misery, both fever and dysentery afflicted him.
Nothing worse, broken leg and fever and dysentery. I bet going to the loo was fun.
Oh, yeah. Now, his brigade... By February, he was back in the field. Now that's a quick recovery. Now commanding the 3rd Brigade, swollen, like his leg, to 7 battalions, with an artillery battery and 2 RE field companies.
So that's a major force. Now, one thing that's interesting is in preparing his camps for overnight, he knew about how accurate the fire could be, and so the tents were over deep trenches, so to give the men protection when they were in bed, so in beddy buys, they were underground. That's quite modern. What is he aware of most of all?
Well, men armed with modern rifles and smokeless cartridges, it makes snipers, for example, extremely difficult to spot.
No smoke.
No smoke. Yeah. Well, unless they have a fag.
Yeah, that would rather ruin it. Now, some important lessons are being learned, not just by Hamilton, by lots of officers on this campaign. What else are they learning?
Well, not only have they got to secure their positions with the pick and shovel, and we talked about this before.
Where was that? Majuba Hill.
Hill. But the fatal consequences of moving in close order.
So you have to spread yourself out.
For Hamilton, it confirmed everything he'd been saying for years.
Now, how did they defeat the Tirah tribes in the end? That other great method, other than slaughtering people, what else do the British do?
Bribe them.
Yep. They bribed them to hand in their modern rifles and desist from banditry attacks. This doesn't entirely work because there's lots of other tribes around. And when the British start to march back into India, some of the Afghan tribes harass the columns. Hamilton was given the duty with his brigade of protecting the lines of passage for the withdrawal of some 20,000 British troops by this time. And that's a tricky business. What does Hamilton say about this?
To deal with these gentry, the only way we found was to crown the crest lines by dawn with light-armed scouts, mostly Gurkhas, who carrying nothing but their rifles, kukris, bandoliers and water bottles, and supported by gunfire from our camp, occupied the heights without much trouble. But when they had to disengage themselves in the evening to get back within the shelter of their own camp pickets, then there was the very deuce to pay. The Afridis would come on with shouts and press hard on their heels, so they had to form a second line on the mountainside, 200 or 300 yards in rear, and then make a sudden simultaneous bolt to pass through this second line and get back by alternative rushes.
So, yeah, I mean, that's fairly standard. I mean, I've heard lots of officers describe that. This isn't Hamilton being original, but it is how it's done. Now, at this point, March 1898, Hamilton is given a choice. What's the choice, Gary?
Well, he was invited to become Quartermaster General India at the then fabulous salary of £3,000 per annum.
And Gary, an expert on currency issues, has worked out that this would be £433,398
in today's money.
But on the very same day, he's offered something else.
Yeah, same day he's offered the Adjutant General of the British Army. Sir Evelyn Wood cabled him with the offer of the interesting post of Commandant of the School of Musketry at Hythe, Kent, at the more modest annual salary of £800.
Although, to be fair, that is 115,572, can't speak, by your calculations, Gazza.
Right, so £3,000 or £800. Which one do you think he chose?
I know what he chose. He chose the latter. What does that show?
Well, it shows that he was not motivated by materialism.
He was more interested in an interesting post and
School and his career, to be fair.
No, he'd have done better to take the other one. School and Musketry, though, is fabulous, isn't it? It's perfect for him.
Well, it couldn't have been more rewarding to him professionally.
No.
His ideas on rifle training could now be spread throughout the British Army.
So what does he do?
Well, in the course of a year, he visited all 11 military districts of the United Kingdom to inspect their efficiency in musketry, and his annual report covered every command, both home and overseas. Blimey, that must have been huge.
Yeah, big job. And the British regular soldier, under his direction, fired 7 times more ammunition on the ranges at Hythe than any of the conscripts in the European armies, the equivalent conscripts. And what does this make you think of?
Well, the astonishing efficiency of the British regulars that poured 15 aim rounds a minute at Mons and Ypres in 1914. That's got to have been founded on the pioneering work of Ian Hamilton.
It is founded on other people's work, and again, we're looking at this is slightly through the Hamilton perspective. But yes, he did vital work towards that. Very, very important. I think it was anyway. Now, he's also involved in the annual manoeuvres in autumn 1898. These were the biggest for 25 years. What were they like?
Well, I'm just checking, 1898. Is that still the middle years, Pete?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. Well, in these grand combined manoeuvres, 50,000 troops were deployed in the West Country. I'm just thinking about that. 50,000 troops in the West Country. Hamilton commanded a brigade in the Blue Army, which was led by Sir Redvers Buller, as it opposed the Duke of Connaught's Red Army.
That's interesting. So he's in Buller's army. I thought he hated Buller. Well, he does what he's told, doesn't he? Now, these manoeuvres are quite interesting because there'd been a bit of a return of the old British square. Why was that?
Well, it proved itself useful in the current Sudan campaign, and some of the older generals were delighted with the excuse to use it.
Now, in these exercises, Buller is comprehensively outmanoeuvred and defeated in the war games. But how does Hamilton's brigade do?
Well, it's been handled very skillfully. From concealed positions, he'd sent out raiding parties so that repeatedly overran the headquarters and communication systems of the Red Brigade opposing him. That it was at one stage declared to be operationally out of action. Was Hamilton congratulated?
No. He was reprimanded for using such unorthodox tactics.
And at this point, we'll take a short break.
Instacart's Deal Week is coming up from December 17th to December 23rd. That means you can get up to 25% off holiday gifts for the whole family from stores like Sephora, Best Buy, PetSmart, and more. And you can get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Just think of it as Instacart's little gift to you. And while we're on the subject, why not get a little something for yourself too? Shop Deal Week from December 17th to 23rd and save up to 25% on gifts. Discounts vary, a minimum spend, maximum discount, and exclusions apply.
Sharing all the joy that the holiday season brings has never been easier. With Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site for even those hard-to-gift people. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing holiday gifts, like festive flowers and arrangements, and fresh fruit and gourmet gift baskets from Harry and David. Make the holidays merrier by gifting smarter at 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Hold that serve. There's no time for pickleball because you're going to want to hear this. Noom now has GLP-1s. No way! Oh, yes way, Fred. Psychology and meds. That's how Noom helps you lose the weight and keep it off.
That's really smart.
Oh, Danny, it's Noom smart. And they start at just $149 and they're shipped to your door in 7 days. Holy smokes, that's fast! But not as fast as my service game. Hey, who's ready to get pickled?
Get started with Noom GLP-1 today. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch, whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
The onset of the Boer War was another chance for active service. General Sir George White, VC, an old friend of Hamilton's and firmly in the Roberts ring, that's an unfortunate phrase, was appointed GOC Natal.
Now, Hamilton was appointed to his staff as Assistant Adjutant General. See, this is all slightly confusing because how come a Roberts person is appointed? But there you go.
And he's an assistant again. He might as well just have had a sign on his desk, assistant.
It's a big post in Assistant Adjutant General for this force anyway. And he sailed to South Africa on 16th September 1899. What's White meant to do? George White meant to do?
Well, he's meant to hold the field until Buller's Army Corps arrived to deliver the coup de grace.
So the idea is they'd stop the Boers in their tracks and then Redvers Buller would arrive and give them a right kicking. Right. Now, what does Hamilton think about the Boers?
Well, after his experience at Majuba Hill, he's well aware that the Boers are a serious opposition.
Now, by the time the Boer ultimatum, now we're not going into how the war started, it expires on the 11th of October. And by this time, White and Hamilton, the staff, they're moving by train to Ladysmith. Now, what do the Boers do?
Well, they assume the offensive, presumably to try for a decision before the arrival of the British reinforcements.
Well, they can work out that reinforcements are on the way, can't they?
Yeah, they struck to the west and the south, hoping to raise up the Cape Afrikaners in their support. But they were soon tied down to besieging the makeshift British and colonial garrisons at Mafeking and Kimberley.
So that sort of sucks in their forces. They've got to surround them and neutralise them, yeah. Now, the other chief offensive was into the Natal, which is where Hamilton is, and that's aiming for the vital port of Durban. Now, the military good sense probably said they should have been opposed along the line of the Tugela River. But the governor of Natal, a politician, insisted that the northern part of the colony had to be defended. White would have settled for Ladysmith as his base, but the temporary local commander, which was Major General Simmons, had already moved a sizable force up the railway line to Dundee. And then there's a further thing, is they also have to send some of White's field force back to defend the capital at Maritzburg. So there's a diffusion of force going on here. So what happens next?
Major General Archibald Hunter, he's now arrived from India to take over as Buller's Chief of Staff and took over in that capacity to Sir George White until Buller arrived.
So he's got nothing to do, so he takes Hamilton's job. So what does that mean Hamilton has to do? Hamilton hasn't got a job then, so what does he do?
Well, Hamilton's delighted to assume command of 7th Infantry Brigade with the local rank of Major General.
Wow.
His old battalion, 2nd Gordon Highlanders, was now under his authority, together with 2 other battalions just over from India, the 1st Devons and the 1st Manchesters.
Now, he begins 3 days intensive training, pressing home his theories of musketry, fire control, fire and movement, all the rest of it. I'm not sure he can... I mean, they make a big thing of this in one of the books I read, but I'm not sure 3 days makes that much difference. But
it does. Oh, it does.
Bollocks.
Yes, exactly. The Boers, they close in on the brigade at Dundee, and they'd soon got behind them, and they cut the railway at Elandslaagte.
Oh, On the 20th of October, Penn Simmons was mortally wounded as he led his infantry in the storming of Talana Hill, and that puts the encroaching Boers to flight. It's a very confusing fight, that, and I am confused by it.
I'm confused how I get a word like Elendslucht and you get Talana Hill.
Yeah, it's not fair. The victors are ordered back to Ladysmith, and to cover them, Sir John French's cavalry, we've heard of him.
Sir John French?
Oh, no, who's with him? Douglas Haig, was ordered to turn the Boers out of, where was it, Gary?
Elandslacht.
That's it. But he found them to be in much greater force than expected, and he wires for assistance. So who's sent to assist him?
Well, White sends reinforcements of Hamilton's brigade and 2 artillery batteries, and they begin to arrive in the late morning of 21st of October. Hamilton swiftly appraised the Boer position, and both White and French deferred to his plan of action.
The Boers held the eastern arm of a horseshoe-shaped ridge that ends in a sort of kopje, and Hamilton set the Devons to assault the ridge frontally, while the Manchesters went for the hill bit, with the Gordon Highlands on their right, seeking to turn round the enemy position. Now, I understand that means absolutely nothing, and I'm also not going to put a map up. You can bugger off, listener.
Excellent. Now, they were supported by dismounted troopers of the Imperial Light Horse, while French kept the 5th Lancers and a mounted squadron of the ILH in hand.
That was intending to exploit any success, I presume.
Yeah. Hamilton, he put into practice the very wide, very loose formations his men had been rehearsing under his direction. The Devons deployed with 3 yards between each man going forward and 450 yards between each attacking wave.
Now, they're advancing in rushes with sections firing and moving alternately in support of one another, while the artillery are heavily sheltering the ridge with shrapnel. This all reminds me of fire and movement and Somme tactics.
Yeah. Now, they had to cover nearly 2 miles, and as they drew closer, the Boer Mausers drove them to ground to seek cover and catch their breath.
Now, meanwhile, the Manchesters and Gordons had begun their ascent of the hill at the other end of the ridge, and there they encounter again something that reminds us of the Great War. What do they encounter?
Well, lines of farmers' wire occasionally held them up, and there was also a thunderstorm, long since threatening, which burst over the battlefield.
Now, they managed to get to the top, but there's some wavering, and just as they get to the top, somebody dashes forward. Who's that?
That's Hamilton, according to Hamilton.
No. And everybody else.
Ordering the buglers to sound the charge. And he inspired his men, and they charged home and gained the crest.
Now then, there's one of those cock-ups. The Boers start to surrender. There's a white flag. The British sound the ceasefire. But then, it's a misunderstanding. A party of 50 Boers had no intention of surrendering, and they fire onto the relaxing British, and this causes a bit of a bloody panic. And who saves the day again?
Well, Hamilton, he rallies his men, and just then the Devons, they come storming up the ridge to put the Boers to flight, who were then lanced by French's cavalry. And you're going to tell us what Ian Hamilton says about that encounter.
It was a stiff fight. A remnant of the Boers fought most desperately to the last, and it required every effort from everyone to pull it off to the very end. Fellows seemed pleased with the infantry tactics. Horrible night, rain in torrents, icy wind, ceaseless moans and groans from the wounded. Nearly frozen. Entered tent in Boer camp, and luckily struck a match before lying down, as I found 2 dead Boers and the head and neck of a dead horse in the tent.
Isn't Victorian punctuation wonderful?
It is. It can absolutely bugger you.
Now, Sir John French personally recommended Hamilton for the Victoria Cross for twice showing a way forward to the attacking infantry. But unfortunately, while he'd been too young and junior at Majuba, he's now too senior.
Yes. Now, the detachment at Dundee were then escorted safely back to Ladysmith, just in time for the Boers to close around the town. And what begins then?
Well, Hamilton, it's the siege. But Hamilton, he'd been keen to attack the main laager of the besieging Boers, which had been reported as poorly defended. White originally agreed, but then he called off the operation in favour of a large-scale attack on the Boers' main position on Pepworth Hill to the north of Ladysmith.
Now, Hamilton argues, he says the troops are too tired for such a major attack. He would have preferred just a more minor spoiling attack, that they'd be vulnerable to enfilade fire from surrounding hill. And White, he's cross at Hamilton, but he agrees. But then I'm afraid White orders. He just sends out, without consultation, sends out several columns against the Boers to the north. And the result is Mournful Monday, which is the Battle of Ladysmith on the 30th of October, 1899. Mournful Monday, is that bad for the Boers then?
I shouldn't think so. I think it's more mournful for us. Only Hamilton's brigade came away with any semblance of order.
According to who?
Well, presumably Hamilton. White then merely maintained a passive defence and he awaited Buller's relief force.
Now, Hamilton's given command of the largest sector of defence of Ladysmith, some 5 miles long. He's only got 1,000 men to defend the position at any one time, because, he's got more. You can't have everyone in the line all the time. He kept his main forces back in a series of small forts along an inner edge of the plateau that's Ladysmith. He's got a 500 to 800 yard field of fire for the defenders. But because they're back in the forts, they're sheltered from the Boer artillery. He's also got a line of outposts and sentries watching the outer edge of the perimeter. And sets up a telephone network to allow for warnings back to White's headquarters. So he sets out his defences well, doesn't he? A competent soldier.
After a skirmish on the 7th of November, a heavy attack on the 9th November, which lasted for most of the day, was decisively repulsed. This both encouraged the defenders and discouraged the Boers from further attacks for several weeks. And I'm going to relate what Ian Hamilton said. Oh, must be in a letter to his wife. I fear, darling, that you must have been anxious. As a matter of fact, this shelling is unpleasant, but not really formidable. This house has been most unlucky. We got one enormous 6-inch shell into the lawn, and then another 97-pound shell from a 6-inch Creusot gun hit the end of the dining room on the ground floor at 8 o'clock precisely, just in fact as we should have been sitting down to breakfast. You would laugh if you saw the room. The flooring is simply ripped up and jammed through the ceiling. That's hilarious. Of the long table, nothing is left at all, and of the chair I sit in, nothing certainly as big as a match. The doors are torn off their hinges, and all glass, pictures, crockery, etc., simply ground into powder.
That must have cheered his wife up enormously.
I bet she loved letters like that, don't you? Hello, darling, bang.
As meanwhile, Buller's and his corps are beginning the approach march to the Tagala River. As they get closer, the Ladysmith garrison, they can become a bit more aggressive and carry out some raids on the Boer gun positions. Hamilton wants to launch a breakout battle, but he's overruled by White. However, then the wheels come off, don't they? Why is that? What happens in December?
Well, there's a string of heavy defeats at
We've heard about this before.
Colenso, Margersfontein and Stormberg. And that's really deeply depressing for the defenders of Ladysmith. Buller told White that if he couldn't hold out, he should fire off his ammunition and seek terms from the enemy.
Now, George White, VC, has no intention of leading 12,000 soldiers into captivity, and he treats the message with the contempt he feels it deserves. Now, at this point, Buller is actually putting the boot into Hamilton. He doesn't like him, and probably because he knows Hamilton's been bad-mouthing him. It is a mutual process, this, and he considers Hamilton a bad influence on White, and to be mad, basically, which is very rude of him. Now, there is good news for Hamilton. What's that?
Well, that Lord Roberts was placed in supreme command in South Africa, and Buller was left with responsibility for the Natal campaign alone.
Now, the Boers made one last attempt to crack the Ladysmith defences, but Hamilton's defensive arrangements proved sound, the lines hold, and the Boers are actually routed, defeated. So what's happening to Buller?
Well, he suffers another defeat at Spion Kop.
Spion.
Spion.
Think of the Coppites.
But the overall pressure was beginning to crack the Boer morale in the Tau. Soon, they were streaming away from the Tubular and from the lines around Ladysmith. On the 28th of February, cavalry from Buller's force under Hubert Gough,
we've heard of him,
ended the 122-day siege.
Now, Lord Roberts, he asks for Hamilton's help as an individual to join his staff, and soon Hamilton's on his way to Cape Town. There, he's given a really impressive force. What's that, Gary?
Well, he takes command of a newly created division of mounted infantry and infantry, 10,000 strong, with the task of moving along some 10 to 20 miles east of the main columns, covering Roberts' flank and uncovering the flank of the enemy facing him.
Now, after 3 weeks of organising and training, his division begins to advance. They were augmented by a cavalry brigade, a mounted infantry brigade, 2 infantry brigades, one commanded by Smith Dorrien.
Heard of him as well.
Heard of him. And 38 guns. So it's a really, really big force. And what's his real rank?
Well, he's acting as a lieutenant general and his subordinates clearly appreciate him.
He's just a colonel.
And this is what Smith Dorrien says. From now on, I enjoyed every moment of the campaign. He was a delightful leader to follow, always definite and clear in his instructions, always ready to listen and willing to adopt suggestions, and, what's more important, always ready to go for the enemy, extremely quick at seizing a tactical advantage, and always in a good temper.
Just like me. His division pushed forward to great effect on the right flank, constantly uncovering the Boers' flank. And I think we think they played a key part in the attack on Johannesburg, which falls on the 30th of May. And I'm going to be Ian Hamilton. He says this, and this is quite impressive. We have had all the fighting. Since we left Bloemfontein, we have marched 401 miles on the map. That is to say, really, at least 450. We've had 10 general engagements and 18 sharp skirmishes and 10 days halt. We've been 45 days on the job. The great fights were Houtneck, Zand River and Johannesburg. The last named was a fine fight. The front of our infantry extending over 5 miles of country and the Gordons attacking and charging with a bayonet in the most splendid style. My poor mounted infantry are in a sad plight. We had 35,000 and now they are barely 2,000. They have had only their one shirt on their back since Bloemfontein and are in utter rags and of course eaten up with vermin. Some of the men ride in naked feet and spurs, their boots having given out. The ponies too have no shoes and are very footsore. What do you say to that?
Wow. I mean, that is incredible.
It is.
35,000 and now barely 2,000.
They're not all dead, they've just dropped out.
But can you imagine the state they're in?
Yeah. Now, Pretoria falls on the 5th of June, and the British try and push the Boers further back.
The Germans?
The Boers. There were some Germans with them. There were 2 Germans with them.
Oh, right.
Push them back so that they can't retake it. And what follows is the Battle of Diamond Hill, as it's called, which is on a hill. On the 11th, 12th of June. And Hamilton's right in the thick of it, and so's somebody else we know. What does he say?
This is what Ian Hamilton says. The key to the battlefield lay on the summit, but nobody knew it until Winston, he means Churchill, somehow managed to give me the slip and to climb this mountain, most of it being dead ground to the Boers. Thus, it was that from his lofty perch, Winston had the nerve to signal me, if I remember right, with his handkerchief on a stick, that if I could only manage to gallop up at the head of my mounted infantry, we ought to be able to rush the summit. At that moment, another message was handed in from Sir John French, saying that our extreme left was falling back. A strong counterstroke seemed, therefore, as if it might come in the nick of time, so I called up my men and jumped onto my little black whaler. Before I had got my right foot into the stirrup, luckily, a blow like the punch from a fist of a giant struck my right shoulder, and I was flung out of the saddle. A shrapnel bullet had struck me, but the range being extreme, had only decorated my back with a big black and blue bruise. So on we galloped. Paul Carew and the guards followed suit, and we were right in among the Boers, firing from horseback, a most glorious scrimmage, before they knew where they were, and lo and behold, the left flank of the Boers was turned. Looks quite simple, doesn't it, on paper? Louis Botha himself told us in his memoirs how he'd been on the point of delivering a crushing blow at French and his cavalry on our extreme left.
And that's another great... I mean, there he is, an officer taking part right in the front line, a bold, aggressive soldier, someone to admire. Now, the Boer leaders are just starting to consider surrender. What does Hamilton think?
Well, he strongly favoured the lenient approach to the Boers, but Roberts took the harder line of insisting on unconditional surrender, especially for prominent Boer leaders.
Now, on 23rd of June that year, Hamilton has another accident. He breaks his collarbone, falling off his horse, and his division goes to Major General Hunter. On his recovery, Hamilton's given another division of infantry and mounted infantry and made a local lieutenant general. And his pay jumps to £7 a day. What's that?
Well, that's about £1,000 in today's value. A day.
Yeah, that's what you get.
Oh, I wished. Now, the year of guerrilla action might have been avoided if a more enlightened policy had been pursued. Hamilton was involved in chasing the elusive Boers around South Africa to little real effect. They disappeared like will-o'-the-wisps, and Hamilton's overall performance was considered excellent, though.
So within the fact they couldn't catch him, he was still
performing. And Lord Roberts says this.
Ian Hamilton is quite the most brilliant commander I have serving under me. He shares with Paul Carew the love and admiration of all his force. He takes infinite trouble in matters of detail and knows his work thoroughly. He is most careful to assure himself exactly what he is required to do. He is very intelligent, untiring in the performance of his duty, and he has that military instinct which would enable him to appreciate when a risk should be run in order to achieve some given objective. I would select him before all others to carry out any difficult operation. Like Gallipoli, I expect.
Yeah, and the word untiring.
Yeah.
That was difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I find that very difficult.
Now, Roberts was to succeed Lord Wolseley as Commander-in-Chief, and he asked Hamilton to be his military secretary.
That's the whole British Army, is it?
Yeah, and he asked Hamilton to be his military secretary as a confirmed Major General.
That means, yes, well, Protestant or...
Yeah. Now, convinced that the war in South Africa was all but over, Roberts left Cape Town for London on the 11th of December, taking Ian Hamilton with him. Lord Kitchener was left in command of the army. A long and thankless task lay ahead of him.
It certainly did, and yes, it was a terrible campaign. So Hamilton's back in London on the 2nd of January 1901, and he's given him and Roberts are given a tumultuous welcome. He's lionised, isn't he, in high society, and he's one of the most successful generals in a war where not many had been successful. But it's not long before he's required for active service again. How come that?
Well, because the guerrilla phase was proving exhausting, costly, and politically disastrous, as the policy of concentrating Boer civilians into camps led to deaths on a large scale among the non-combatants. Roberts made the tentative suggestion that Kitchener might like Hamilton to serve as his Chief of Staff, and the offer was accepted on the 5th of November. And Lord Kitchener said this: "I am extremely grateful. There is nothing I would like better. He is just the man I want. Hamilton will be a great help to me."
As a result, 9th of November that same year, Hamilton's on his way back to South Africa. So what's facing? What are the problems Kitchener's facing?
Well, he's certainly feeling the strain of conducting the war in his usual way, making all the decisions himself. We've said this before about Kitchener. He doesn't delegate well, and leaving very little for his staff officers to do.
Yeah, but Hamilton's got an advantage. He's had years of being Roberts' right-hand man, and he's able to sort of circumnavigate the great man, Kitchener. So what does he do?
Well, he sort of circumnavigates him, and he undertakes extensive staff duties on behalf of his chief, which it makes him perfect to be Kitchener's Chief of Staff.
So what are his priorities?
Well, he lists them as such: to reassure Kitchener that he had the full support of the War Office,
to take the burden of staff work and free Kitchener for operational duties,
to try for a 1-month armistice in the Transvaal and Orange River colony to break up and demoralise the commandos,
and lastly, to improve the deplorable level of British musketry. It's worth pointing out, it's still deplorable.
So Hamilton was soon running the day-to-day details of the war, the organising of patrols between blockhouses and the sweeps of columns, which he reduced from large-scale efforts to more concentrated work against particular local commandos.
Now, Roberts is still, as Commander-in-Chief of the British Army, opposed to any leniency, despite Hamilton's continued pleadings and also Kitchener's attitude. Hamilton wants to incorporate the Boers into the British Empire with the least possible delay. And as I say, Kitchener shared this view, and together the two local commanders, Kitchener's a local commander, but Hamilton's his chief of staff, they try and encourage the peace process.
As the focus of the war centred more and more on the hunt for Boer leaders in the Western Transvaal, the British column commanders wrote to Kitchener asking if Hamilton could be sent to act as a local commander-in-chief to coordinate the work of their several columns.
Wow. So April 1902, Hamilton is given this task, and he ends up directing 13 columns searching for these ringleaders, and he draws a net tighter and tighter around them. It's becoming hopeless, isn't it? So what happens?
Well, the Boer leaders realise there's no point in further resistance. Kitchener seized the moment and made proposals of a generous nature.
What sort of thing?
Well, he offered, for example, to make good the losses to Boer farms and the like, which drove the wedge deeper between the moderates and the diehards in the enemy delegation.
The end result is on 31st of May 1902, the Boer leaders, they'd been promised representative government at the earliest possible time, after the peace had signed. That had been won for them by Kitchener's insistence. They signed a peace treaty, and that's the end of the war. So where do we leave Hamilton now then?
Well, he returned to London at the very height of his fame. His victories in the field were complemented by his brilliant staff work. He was highly regarded as a far-sighted thinker on military affairs. So surely he's destined for the very top.
We shall see, Gary, we shall see. Now, I want to mention, we're coming to the end of this phase. For both these podcasts, we've been very reliant on several books. The first one is A Soldier's Life by John Lee, which is a military biography of Hamilton. And it's old now, but it's brilliant. It's about 20 years old. I really recommend that, and I recommend you read that, Gary. The second one is, what is it?
Well, we're going to get the title correct this time. It's Listening for the Drums, by Sir Ian Hamilton. Now, that's the main source.
Yeah, of quotes from him. He wrote that in the 40s. It came out, 45? 4 years before he died. And that's the main source of the quotes on Majuba Hill and other things. And it's a brilliant book. And for the very early stuff, we used When I Was a Boy by Ian Hamilton. He's an interesting man, and we've got quite a lot of sympathy for him, and it's certainly a great admiration for him. There are edges to his personality I find quite difficult, but I still regard him highly. What do you think?
Well, I think that's quite common. We've talked about bad-tempered generals, for example. There are edges to a number of them. What I like is the fact that it highlights the crisscrossing of their paths as they arrive at the Great War. They're not just sort of dropped there by some sort of TARDIS.
They have a backstory.
They have a backstory. They have a back and a story.
What about a front story?
And a ring.
Cheers.
Pete.
Thanks for listening to the show.
Blah, blah, blah.
If you'd like to support us, you can now buy us a coffee. Visit www.buymeacoffee.com/PGMH.
Or visit www.blah.
And we'd be jolly grateful.
Cheers.
Holiday shopping is here, and Amazon Live has got you covered. Shop for the perfect gift from the comfort of your home with Amazon Live's shoppable video experience. Discover the hottest products from influencers and shop while you watch. This season, join Candy Burris from Real Housewives in her holiday Amazon Live series, Generation Face Off, where Candy, her mom, Mama Joyce, and daughter Riley share their favorite stocking stuffers and go-to gifts across fashion, beauty, and more. Watch and shop new episodes of Candy's series Generation Face Off now by going to amazon.com/candylive. That's amazon.com/candylive. For a limited time, use promo code CANDYLIVE for $5 off an eligible product featured on the first episode of the series. That's KANDILIVE. Promotion expires on December 25th, 2024. Limited supply of goods. Terms and conditions apply. For full promotion terms and conditions, go to amazon.com/candyterms.
Sharing all the joy that the holiday season brings has never been easier. With Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site for even those hard-to-gift people. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing holiday gifts, like festive flowers and arrangements, and fresh fruit and gourmet gift baskets from Harry and David. Make the holidays merrier by gifting smarter at 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn more about each episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you have a couple of options. You can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/PGMH, or consider subscribing to the podcast for only £2 per month and get ad-free listening and bonus content. You can find links for both on our Facebook and Twitter accounts.
Sounds great, doesn't it?